Welcome to AI Deep History, a channel that explores the full scope of world history, across continents, cultures, empires, and eras. From ancient civilizations to modern revolutions, our goal is to uncover the stories that shaped humanity. Using advanced AI technology, we gather and analyze information from a wide range of verified sources, archaeological findings and historical records across different cultures, languages, and perspectives. This allows us to present history in a way that is neutral, deeply researched, and free from modern bias or personal interpretation. Our current series focuses on one of the most influential civilizations in human history, the Roman Empire. This detailed series will cover the entire history of Rome, from its prehistoric roots to its lasting global legacy, organized into 7 major parts. 1. Pre-Roman Italy, 1200 BCE to 753 BCE. Explore the Bronze Age cultures of Italy, the Apennine, Villanovan, Etruscan, and early Greek influences. 2. The Roman Kingdom, 753-509 BCE. Learn about Rome's legendary kings, early laws, and foundational customs. 3. The Roman Republic, 509 to 27 BCE. Trace the Republic's expansion, political structure, social struggles, and civil wars. 4. The Roman Empire, 27 BCE to 235 CE. Follow the rise of emperors, imperial achievements, engineering, and cultural dominance. 5. Crisis, division, and transformation, 235 to 476 CE. Examine the internal conflicts, invasions, and religious shifts that led to Rome's western fall. 6. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, 476-1453 CE. Discover how the Roman legacy continued for 1,000 more years in the East. 7. Rome's legacy and modern influence, 1453 today. Understand how Roman law, language, architecture, religion, and governance still shape the modern world. Each episode features rulers, key reforms, major events, and battles, religion, philosophy, economy, and daily life, the roles of women, slaves, soldiers, and citizens, food, art, language, engineering, and innovation, archaeological discoveries, and multi-perspective analysis. Whether you're interested in ancient empires, cultural evolution, scientific progress, or forgotten stories from around the globe, AI Deep History brings them all together in one place. Subscribe to explore the Roman Empire in this series, and stay tuned for future explorations into other civilizations and eras from world history. Let us start the first episode of this series, Episode 1, Bronze Age Italy, Tribes Before Rome. Long before Rome's marble temples gleamed beneath the Mediterranean sun or its legions marched across continents, Italy was a land of raw, untamed wilderness and ancient mystery. Towering forests cloaked the hillsides in deep emerald canopies that whispered with the wind, their branches creaking like ancient voices. Rivers clear and cold wound like serpents through fertile valleys, carving paths through rock and soil, bringing life to whatever they touched. Volcanic peaks loomed on the horizon, silent titans that smoldered with the memory of past eruptions and the promise of future creation. These landscapes were alive with power, unpredictable and sacred, regarded with awe by those who called them home. In this primal landscape, long before Latin was spoken or laws inscribed, small, resilient communities carved out their existence not as conquerors, but as stewards of the land. They hunted in the shadows of great trees, fished in the glassy lakes, and followed animal trails that had existed for centuries. They moved with the rhythm of the seasons, guided by the stars and the wisdom of elders. These early tribes, largely forgotten in the shadow of Rome's future glory, were the quiet architects of a civilization that had not yet been imagined, but was already taking root. They built nothing grand or permanent by Roman standards, but their legacy would echo in every stone road, every law, every god the Romans would one day worship. Their lives were harsh, yes, buffeted by storms, threatened by hunger, challenged by disease, but they were also filled with purpose. The smell of wood smoke at dawn, the rhythm of grinding grain, the communal songs that rose with the morning mist, all were parts of a shared existence that gave shape to survival. Adaptation was not just necessity, it was their strength. They understood their world intimately, which plants could heal or poison, which animals to hunt and which to respect, when the rains would come and when the earth would crack with thirst. This was a world where every sunrise offered possibility, a moment to act, to hunt, to gather, to build, to survive. And every sunset brought stories around the fire. Tales passed down from voice to voice, memory to memory, generation to generation. Myths of sky gods and river spirits, of ancestors who walked as wolves and deer, of the first fires stolen from the mountain. Around the flames, faces glowed with reverence and imagination. In these moments, they weren't merely surviving, they were dreaming. They were becoming something more. The seeds of greatness of Rome were already stirring in the soil beneath their feet. They lived in close harmony with the rhythms of nature, not merely surviving, but thriving through their deep understanding of the land. Each passing season shaped their behavior and routines like clockwork, dictating when they would plant, hunt, gather, and migrate. Spring was a time of renewal, of planting seeds in fertile riverbanks and watching green shoots stretch toward the sky. In the summer, they fished in cool mountain streams and harvested wild herbs under the long daylight. Autumn saw the collection of grains, nuts, and berries, which were carefully dried and stored in woven baskets or clay jars for the lean winter months. In the biting cold of winter, they huddled in earth-insulated shelters, warmed by central fires that served as both hearth and altar. The sun was their compass, and the stars their calendar. They navigated by the constellations, following the sweeping arc of the Milky Way, as if it were a path painted by the gods themselves. By observing the slow crawl of the moon's phases and the seasonal movements of key constellations, like Orion in winter or the Pleiades in spring, they crafted a mental calendar, each celestial body marking sacred times for planting, hunting, or gathering. At night, as fires flickered across the valleys, elders pointed to the heavens, naming the stars and recounting the ancient myths tied to their light. From the dense woodlands and fertile riverbanks, they hunted with reverence and patience. Red deer moved like ghosts through the misty trees, wild boar crashed through underbrush, and ibex picked their way over steep rock faces. Hunters set out before dawn, moving silently in groups, their breath steaming in the cold morning air. They wielded spears tipped with knapped flint or bronze, honed to a deadly edge. The making of these weapons was itself a ceremony, each one shaped carefully to balance strength and precision. Hunting was a skill learned from early childhood, but it was also spiritual. Rituals often preceded the hunt, calling upon forest spirits for guidance or forgiveness. Tracking foxes and wolves demanded both patience and deep observation. Footprints, broken twigs, and the faint scent of musk were clues in a living puzzle. The people studied migration routes, mating seasons, and feeding patterns, with an accuracy born of generations. Some would mimic bird calls or wear the skins of animals to blend in. They moved like shadows across their homeland, using knowledge passed from one hunter's tale to another. Wolves were both feared and respected, symbols of cunning and family unity. Their diets were rich with aquatic life as well. Fish swam thick in the rivers during seasonal runs. Nets, woven from supple reeds or nettle fibers, were cast from canoes or stretched across narrow inlets. Children learned to carve sharpened hooks from bone and bait them with insects. Traps were set in shallows weighted with stones. In early spring, birds returning from the south were netted or lured with scattered grain. Their feathers became adornments, their bones tools, and their meat a treasured delicacy. Nothing was wasted in this economy of respect. Bones were carved into needles, scrapers, and awls. Antlers became handles, flutes, or ceremonial combs. Hides were soaked, scraped, stretched, and smoked to create soft leather for tunics, moccasins, and tent flaps. Tendons were dried and split into sinew perfect for binding arrowheads, sewing clothes, or reinforcing tools. Even shells and teeth were turned into jewelry, worn not only for beauty but for protection or status. The entire animal was honored, every part given purpose, its spirit thanked in quiet prayer or symbol etched into stone. This balance of utility, reverence, and ingenuity defined their relationship with the natural world. They did not conquer the land, they conversed with it. The forest was not merely a resource but a relative. The river was not a tool but a teacher. In every aspect of their survival, from the stars above to the soil beneath, they found meaning, and in that meaning they laid the foundation for what would become the Roman world view, a belief in order, in destiny, and in the sacred responsibility to live with the land rather than above it. They knew which herbs could ease childbirth, which roots would stop bleeding, and which berries were best avoided. Women often served as herbalists. Their knowledge passed orally from mother to daughter. Children were taught early to recognize the signs of weather changes, animal migrations, and the proper way to harvest bark without killing the tree. Their relationship with their environment was spiritual as much as practical. Each tree, stone, and stream was considered alive, a part of the same living world that sustained them. Early agricultural efforts gradually anchored these nomadic people into more stable patterns of settlement. They tamed wild grains like emmer wheat and barley, learned to dry and store them, and even developed rudimentary irrigation using diverted stream channels and woven sluices. Over generations, they experimented with crop rotation, realizing that certain plants enriched the soil. Their small fields, often carved out of forest clearings or river terraces, became community focal points, drawing families together in cooperative planting and harvest. These were not aimless wanderers, but thoughtful engineers of their own survival. They constructed shelters from interwoven saplings, packed with clay and thatched with straw or reed. Some dwellings were half sunken into the ground to conserve heat. Others were raised to avoid flooding. Entrances often faced east to welcome the morning sun. Inside, hearths glowed, drying racks hung from rafters, and walls were decorated with carved patterns and talismans made from bones or feathers. They also developed an impressive range of tools and technologies to meet their daily needs. Stone hand axes, bronze sickles, bone needles, and antler picks were all carefully shaped, maintained, and passed on or buried with their owners. Clay pottery evolved from simple hand-molded bowls to intricately patterned vessels fired in open kilns. Baskets and nets were woven from reeds and rushes, dyed with natural pigments and sometimes waterproofed with resin. Community was at the heart of everything. Tasks were shared and rhythms synchronized. While some fetched water, others shaped tools or spun wool. Rituals often accompanied even the most mundane of activities. A whispered blessing before a hunt, a chant during sowing, a prayer of thanks after a meal. Celebrations marked the solstices, harvests, and life passages. Music was made from bone flutes, drums of stretched hide, and even strings fashioned from animal gut. Laughter, song, and shared meals wove a fabric of belonging that bound each generation to the next. They were not primitive. They were observant, innovative, and adaptive, masters of an ecosystem that would baffle modern eyes. Their days were not easy, but they were rich with meaning and ritual. Every member of the group had a role, from the youngest child who gathered kindling to the elders whose stories and judgments guided the tribe. Through collaboration and accumulated knowledge, they built a way of life as resilient and enduring as the hills they called home. Among the earliest and most prominent of these peoples was the Apennine culture, which developed along the central mountain spine of the Italian peninsula. These highlands, forested, mist-laden, and carved by hidden streams, offered both challenges and protections. Named after the rugged Apennine range that shaped their geography and their way of life, these people were primarily pastoralists, shepherds of goats, sheep, and cattle. They moved seasonally with their animals, following ancient routes up to flower-covered alpine pastures in the summer and descending to sheltered, milder valleys in winter. This transhumant lifestyle instilled an intimate knowledge of the terrain and a spiritual bond with the land. Their homes, round or oval huts constructed from timber frames, daubed with mud and straw and roofed with reeds, formed tight clusters around springs or fertile clearings. These dwellings were modest but sturdy, insulated against cold and designed to endure wind and rain. Each family had a fire at its center, and smoke spiraled lazily out of smoke holes. Inside, families slept on raised beds of woven mats and stored their food in large, burnished jars sealed with wax or hide. Daily life in an Apennine village was deeply communal. The entire settlement shared in the raising of livestock, repair of fences, and harvesting of wild fruits or cultivated crops. Children herded lambs along hillsides, learning animal sounds and medicinal herbs as they wandered. Women prepared meals over open fires, crafted clothing from wool and flax, and wove baskets or blankets with practiced hands. Men shaped stone and bronze tools, felled trees, and built sledges to transport goods over rough terrain. Seasonal migration was a festival of movement. Tribes packed their belongings onto wooden carts or carried them in woven packs, singing as they walked. Rituals accompanied almost every phase of life, infusing the rhythms of existence with sacred meaning. Before moving to summer pastures, the entire village would gather in a circle under the open sky, chanting ancient songs passed down for generations. A central fire was lit, and its smoke was believed to carry prayers upward to the sky gods, celestial guardians of the highlands. Animal bones, carved wooden talismans, and bundles of herbs were cast into the flames as offerings, while small clay figurines were buried at key crossroads along the migration route, guardians meant to ward off evil and guide the way. When a child was born, the event was celebrated with both joy and solemnity. Elders conducted a naming rite, holding the infant toward the mountains and whispering its name into the wind, believing the spirits would carry it across the peaks. The family would offer goat's milk and honey to a shrine or sacred stone nearby, and a protective charm, often a bead, tooth, or carved animal, was tied to the child's wrist or ankle. These talismans were meant to protect the newborn from illness, misfortune, or malevolent spirits that lurked in the dark woods. Death, too, was marked with reverence and ceremony. When someone died, their body was carefully washed and anointed with fragrant oils made from pine resin and wild herbs. They were wrapped in woven linen or deerskin, adorned with shells, bone beads, and symbols of their life's journey. Songs of mourning echoed through the hills as the community carried the body to a chosen burial site, often a high ridge bathed in morning sun. Stone-lined graves were prepared with precision, their walls reinforced with flat slabs and covered with heavy stones to prevent disturbance. Into the grave went not only the body, but a selection of goods, tools for work in the next life, bowls of grain and meat, and personal objects like carved combs or decorated blades. The choice of burial items was deeply symbolic. A man known for his hunting skill might be buried with his favorite spear and a pouch of flint. A woman who was a healer might lie beside a bundle of dried herbs and a carved wooden idol of the forest mother. Children were given small toys, beads, and tokens of hope, their graves decorated with painted stones or feathers. Some graves were marked with cairns or standing stones etched with family symbols, ensuring the ancestors would recognize their kin. These rituals were not just farewells, they were acts of continuity, connecting the living to the dead and reaffirming the tribe's collective memory. Every season, families returned to these burial sites to light fires, leave food, and speak the names of the departed. The cycle of life, death, and remembrance bound the community together, echoing through generations. The spirits of the ancestors, they believed, watched over them, whispered guidance in dreams, and lived on in the earth, wind, and trees. Through these sacred rites, the people gave shape and meaning to their world, embedding themselves into the land they loved and the stories they told. Education was oral and experiential. Elders recounted histories, myths, and survival lessons in the evenings, when the fire crackled and shadows danced on the walls. Children learned by doing, by watching, by mimicking the steady hands of their parents. Songs preserved the calendar. Dances mimicked the cycles of sun and moon. From the rhythm of a loom to the footpath worn by centuries of shepherds, every action echoed the past. In this way, the Apennine culture thrived, not through conquest or grand monuments, but through harmony with the earth, respect for tradition, and the slow accumulation of knowledge passed from one soul to another across time. They left few written records, but in the bones of their huts, the traces of their fields, and the tales whispered by their descendants, their story lives on as the prelude to Rome's own epic. Fire was the heart of every home. Flames warmed the space, cooked meals, and lit the darkness. Around it, generations sat together, grandparents teaching grandchildren, mothers weaving and spinning, and fathers repairing tools. Oral tradition was rich. Stories of the stars, of heroic hunters, and protective spirits of the land were passed down with care. Each tale served a purpose, preserving wisdom, reinforcing social bonds, and nurturing spiritual identity. Through stories, they understood the world, when to plant, when to harvest, what signs in the sky foretold coming storms, or which dreams warned of danger. Songs and chants bound them to their ancestors and gave rhythm to their rituals. In the north, along the lush and expansive plains of the Po Valley, a more structured and impressively organized society emerged. The Terra Mare culture. These people, innovators of their age, designed something entirely new for prehistoric Europe. Villages built on wooden platforms, raised above marshes, seasonal lakes, or flood-prone terrain. These were not simply stilt houses of survival, but sophisticated, elevated communities. Each village was an engineering feat, combining functionality with communal design. Wooden piles were driven deep into the soil to support platforms on which homes were built, providing protection against flooding and allowing for better drainage and sanitation. Around these elevated homes, wide defensive ditches were dug with precision, often filled with water to act as moats. Timber palisades, reinforced with clay and stone, encircled the settlements, revealing a keen awareness of security needs both from nature and hostile outsiders. The layouts of these villages were geometric and consistent. Central courtyards served as communal gathering spaces, while specific zones were designated for storage pits, pottery kilns, metal workshops, and religious shrines. This level of spatial organization was centuries ahead of its time. Within the dwellings, rooms were laid out with care, raised sleeping platforms, central hearths, food storage jars, and shelves for tools or ornaments. Clay floors were sometimes baked for hardness. Rainwater was collected via sloped thatched roofs and channeled through gutters into cisterns or barrels. Everything about the Terra Mare settlements suggests long-term habitation, investment in infrastructure, and collective planning that could only have emerged from a cohesive and cooperative society. Even pathways between homes were intentionally laid out, sometimes with wooden walkways, to connect all parts of the village. This architectural foresight demonstrates not only survival ingenuity, but also a deep respect for balance and sustainability. Trees were not over-harvested, waste was managed carefully, with refuse pits located at a distance from living quarters. The placement of each building took into account sun exposure, wind direction, and water flow. In these choices, we glimpse a society whose identity was rooted in their landscape, a culture that recognized engineering not as domination over nature, but as partnership with it. The Terra Mare weren't just builders, They were planners, environmentalists, and civic-minded innovators. Their villages were the physical manifestation of social order and community cohesion, and they remain one of the most extraordinary archaeological testimonies to pre-Roman ingenuity in the Italian peninsula. The sophistication of Terra Mare society extended to their governance and economy. While no written records survive, the very nature of their settlements suggests collective planning, decision-making, and perhaps early forms of leadership or tribal councils. They worked together to maintain their infrastructure, manage shared resources, and protect their homes from natural disasters and hostile outsiders. Their survival depended on cooperation, and through this necessity arose a proto-political consciousness that would echo in later Italic societies. Their success reflected long-term thinking, negotiation, and shared sacrifice, where no one thrived unless everyone did. Central to both the Apennine and Terra Mare cultures was their mastery of bronze. This alloy of copper and tin marked the dawn of a new era, transforming how people lived, fought, farmed, and built. Bronze was harder and more durable than stone, capable of holding a sharp edge and withstanding repeated use. The smiths who worked with bronze held positions of high respect. Their forges were both practical workspaces and spiritual centers, places where earth and fire met to create objects of power and purpose. These artisans were guardians of sacred knowledge, masters of heat, time, and balance. The creation of a bronze tool or weapon was an intricate multi-stage process. Copper was mined in the hills, tin was brought from distant lands, perhaps as far as Cornwall or the eastern Alps, and both were melted in clay furnaces fueled by charcoal. Bellows made from leather sacks pumped air into the fire, raising the temperature high enough to fuse the metals. Once molten, the bronze was poured into stone or sand molds, then cooled, polished, and sometimes inscribed with symbols or decorations that held cultural significance. The finished objects, axes, blades, brooches, held more than utility. They held status, identity, and spiritual value. These tools changed everything. Farmers could now till more land and harvest more food. Hunters could bring down larger prey with better arrows and spears. Builders could shape wood with new efficiency. Bronze also became a medium of status and exchange. It was traded for goods and services, bartered in markets, and offered as tribute or dowry. A well-made blade or decorative pin could travel hundreds of miles, linking communities across the peninsula and beyond. The movement of bronze shaped networks of power, alliance, and influence. Chiefs were buried with ornate weapons, women with elaborately worked ornaments. Indeed, trade became a defining feature of this era. The people of Bronze Age Italy were not isolated. They were part of a growing web of commerce and cultural exchange stretching across the Mediterranean. Obsidian from Lipari, amber from the Baltic, faience from Egypt, and pottery from the Aegean found their way into Italian settlements. In return, the tribes offered raw materials, wool, livestock, and bronze items. These exchanges carried more than objects' powers. They carried ideas, customs, and beliefs. Foreign artisans sometimes settled among Italic tribes, introducing new styles, rituals, and innovations. Religion, too, evolved alongside these developments. Rooted in the cycles of nature, early Italic spiritual practices honored the forces of the earth, sky, and water. Trees were sacred, springs were divine, mountains were the thrones of ancient gods. Sacred spaces were often simple, a ring of stones, a secluded grove, a clearing by a river. Rituals were communal affairs. Offerings of food, drink, and valuable items were made to appease or thank the spirits. Fire played a central role in ceremonies, both as a purifier and as a symbol of transformation. Songs and dances accompanied rites of passage, sowing, harvest, and mourning. Shamans or elders presided over rituals, reading omens in animal bones, stars, or smoke. Funerary customs offer some of the richest insights into their worldview. The dead were treated with profound care. In Apennine communities, bodies were often buried in fetal positions, facing east, the direction of the rising sun. This gesture may have symbolized rebirth or the soul's journey into the next world. In terra mare sites, cremation became increasingly common. Ashes were placed in urns shaped like miniature houses, complete with stylized roofs and doorways. These urns were then buried in clusters, suggesting family or clan-based plots. Grave goods reflected gender roles, social status, and perhaps personal achievements. Women were buried with spindle whorls, beads, and mirrors, men with weapons, tools, and ornaments. Even children were interred with care, tiny cups, toys, and charms placed lovingly by their side. These burial sites were often revisited in seasonal rites, connecting the living and the dead in an ongoing spiritual relationship. As time passed, these early societies grew more complex and sophisticated in both structure and vision. By the late Bronze Age, around the 10th and 9th centuries BCE, a transformative culture began to emerge in central and northern Italy, the Villanovan culture. Rising out of a matrix of interwoven local traditions and external influences, the Villanovans are seen as the direct cultural and genetic predecessors to the Etruscans, one of Italy's most enigmatic and influential civilizations. Their rise marked a significant shift in the region, moving from loosely organized tribal networks to more stratified and politically cohesive communities. The Villanovans introduced a number of striking innovations that set them apart from their predecessors. Most notably, they adopted a new form of cremation burial that reflected evolving religious and metaphysical beliefs. Ashes were placed in biconical urns, vessels with a distinctive hourglass shape, often accompanied by finely crafted goods such as fibulae, brooches, weapons, and even miniature chariots. These funerary artifacts suggest not only technological advancement, but also an emerging ideology of social distinction and spiritual afterlife. The graves themselves, arrayed in organized cemeteries, speak of a people who were beginning to develop a sense of ancestry, territory, and historical continuity. Metalworking reached new levels of refinement under the Villanovans. Bronze items, including intricately decorated helmets, razors, and belt clasps, demonstrate both technical mastery and aesthetic sensibility. The emergence of iron tools and weapons late in the Villanovan period also points to their early experimentation with the next major technological leap, the Iron Age. These developments allowed them to expand agriculture, defend their settlements more effectively, and engage in trade with far-off lands across the Adriatic and the wider Mediterranean. Villanovan settlements evolved into semi-urban centers with more durable structures and deliberate planning. While still constructed from wood and mud brick, buildings began to take on standardized forms. Hearths, granaries, and defensive structures appeared alongside ritual sites, suggesting a layering of economic, spiritual, and political life. The population density increased, and long-term settlement patterns began to show evidence of neighborhood formation and possibly even administrative zones. With these physical changes came socio-political transformations. Elites began to emerge, men and women buried with gold jewelry, imported pottery, and weapons made not for combat, but for ceremony. These elites likely controlled land, organized labor, and possibly even maintained standing militias or religious retinues. The accumulation of wealth and the control of specialized goods like amber, faience, and painted ceramics hint at the early development of class divisions, with power consolidated among those who could secure and maintain external connections. Trade networks played an essential role in this rise to prominence. The Villanovans exchanged resources such as salt, wool, and metals with Greek, Balkan, and Eastern Mediterranean partners. These interactions not only brought material wealth, but also foreign ideas, technologies, and artistic motifs. Orientalizing influences began to appear in local art and burial goods, evidence of a culture eager to absorb and adapt what it encountered beyond the peninsula. Urbanization was not merely a byproduct of increased population. It was a conscious transformation of space and society. Paths became roads. Seasonal encampments became year-round towns. Public spaces emerged, areas for trade, ritual, and governance. Boundaries were drawn, walls were raised. These changes signaled a shift from kinship-based organization to civic identity, a crucial step toward the kind of statehood that Rome would one day perfect. With stronger leadership came a burgeoning sense of territoriality and legal consciousness. Though no Villanovan laws survive in written form, the emergence of social norms is evident in the consistency of grave goods, the formalization of property boundaries, and the repetition of symbolic motifs across regions. It was a society beginning to recognize the value of order, continuity, and inherited legacy. Thus, the Villanovans laid the cultural and structural groundwork for the Etruscans, who in turn would deeply shape the early Romans. Through their innovations in metallurgy, burial, urbanization, and governance, the Villanovans were architects of a new Italic identity, one rooted in the land, but looking outward toward the world. Their echoes would resound through Roman law, religion, and city planning, forming a bridge between the tribal past and the imperial future. Although Rome had yet to be born, the essence of Roman identity was already forming. The technologies, belief systems, and social structures pioneered in the Bronze Age laid the foundation for the republic, empire, and legacy that would follow. Through their resilience, innovation, and deep connection to the land, these early Italic peoples shaped a culture that would one day shape the world. They taught Rome how to survive, how to govern, and how to remember. This was not yet empire, but it was the beginning of something grand, a tremor in the earth before the rise of a civilization that would shake the world. Before Romulus and Remus, before the Senate and the legions, before the marble columns and crimson banners, there was only the raw pulse of survival and the relentless heartbeat of the land. The tribes of early Italy, cloaked in mystery and memory, lived lives that would not be carved into monuments or chronicled in scrolls, but their legacy endures in ways no sword or edict ever could. Their names are long forgotten, whispered only in the language of bone fragments and weathered ruins, yet their stories live on in the ancient footpaths worn into the hillsides, in the carved stone tools left beside crumbled hearths, in the sacred groves where they once sang to unseen gods. The myths they wove of gods hidden in the rivers, of heroes born from trees, of stars guiding hunters home, became the echoes that would shape the Roman imagination for centuries. In the hushed mornings of the Italian dawn, when the mists curl around the olive trees and the mountains hold the first blush of sunlight, one can almost hear their voices, soft and steady, telling the stories that bound them to this land. From the firelit huts clustered near the Tiber's early meanders, to the echoing chants beneath moonlit skies, these people laid the unseen foundation of empire with every breath they took. From humble graves built with reverence to field walls carefully stacked stone upon stone, from the flicker of ritual fires to the seasonal migration paths that etched lines across the peninsula, their world was one of quiet resilience and emergent hope. They endured floods, famine, disease, and the cold indifference of time. Yet they also dreamed of better tools, of fairer seasons, of a future in which their children might thrive. And those dreams, spoken softly by firelight and passed down through myth and memory, became the foundation stones of Roman destiny. In the shadowed valleys and silent groves of Bronze Age Italy, Rome's heart began to beat, not as an empire, but as an idea, seeded in struggle and sprouted in the soil of hope. Long before anyone called it Rome, the essence of its greatness was already stirring, waiting for the moment when myth would become memory, and memory would become history. In this episode, we explored the early tribes of Bronze Age Italy, uncovered the mysteries of the Villanovan and Apennine cultures, and saw how the Etruscans and Greeks laid the cultural foundations for what would one day become Rome. If you enjoyed this journey into the deep past, make sure to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more episodes as we continue the epic story of Rome.